Of all the ancient gods, Haides is perhaps the most misunderstood. Due to a conflation with Satan and Hell, and due to his name also being the kingdom over which he rules alongside Persephone, it seems only natural that in a post-Christian world he'd be conflated with evil. But was he? Welcome to the first Patreon bonus video, requested by TheoiPhilos, on Hades. Kairete! Haides is a difficult god to research, both due to his large absence in myth, but also in cultus. We'll get into his conflations with Pluton later, but suffice to say, under the name Haides, sources are scant. In fact, in Homer, where the name is most mentioned in ancient literature, he is specifically referenced by the name Haidonius 3 times between the Iliad and the hymn to Demeter, to make sure the listener knew he was specifically referring to the god and not the place. Haides has an interesting place in Greek mythology, as the ruler of the kingdom of the dead when the world was divided up among the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and himself, but not as the god who presides over the time of death itself, or the funerary rites surrounding it. This was given over to other gods, such as Hermes Sukapompos, who guided the dead souls to the river Styx, Hypnos, who guided the eyes of the dead shut and also ruled over non-death sleep, Thanatos, who was said to be the one who caused the moment of death, and Charon, who ferried the souls to the kingdom of the dead after the fare had been paid. The time and manner of death was largely determined by the Moirai, or the Fates, who were said to rule over the length and character of one's life, though individual human choices were said to have influence. I'll cover the Fates in a future video. So what did ruling the underworld in this context mean for Haides then, if he didn't decide when or how one died, or even make sure you got to his kingdom? Homer gives us a clue in the Iliad, when Poseidon shakes the earth to, as Ellie Roberts states in Underworld Gods in Greek Religion, Death and Reciprocity, announce the gods are now participating in the fray. Haidonius, lord of the dead below, was in terror and sprang from his throne and screamed aloud for fear that above him, he who circles the land, Poseidon, might also break the earth open and the house of the dead lay open to men and immortals, ghastly and moldering so that the very gods shudder before them. This gives us an idea of the character Homer viewed Haides with. According to Roberts, he was a god of unseen places and things unseen. His name etymologically may have even meant unseen one or lord of the unseen, which makes sense, as one should only see his realm when one is going there for the afterlife. I'm not going to go too deep into what the Greek afterlives were like here, because it's a complex enough topic for its own video. And yes, that was afterlives plural. There were several different ideas over time, from Homer to Platon and beyond. Coming back to the idea of Haides' fear here, a large part of his power appears to come from this rulership over the unseen. Exposing his kingdom and thereby its residents was a personification here that points to this idea, and as Robert says, the fact that his power appears to stem in part from this invisibleness. Unlike all the other gods, who were said to be invisible to men when it suited their purposes, Haides was always invisible until the condition of living was lifted and one passed into his realm. That realm could not be easily accessed by gods or humans with no business being there, as Roberts puts it, and this invisibility had become Haides' largest asset. Another layer of mythological support for this idea comes from the so-called Helm of Invisibility, which first shows up in Homer's Iliad when Athena uses it to hide from Ares. Pseudo-Apollodoros gives credit to the Kuklops for the creation and gift of the helm, stating that it was gifted to Haides when Zeus received the thunderbolt and Poseidon his trident. When Hesiod mentions the helm in the Shield of Heracles, it is said to cloak the wearer in the awful gloom of night rather than simply being invisible. Hesiod and Homer were said to be in agreement with one another on the nature of the gods, and between the two a pretty coherent theology can be drawn. In the Iliad, when Tlepommos is killed by Sarpedon, down upon his eyes came the darkness of night and enfolded him, which showcases the tie between darkness and death. The living, as Roberts puts it, may see the light, but the dead are forever shrouded in darkness. Homer also describes the place Haides as a dark, moldering, and dreary place, though when I do my future video on the Greek afterlives plural, we will see that not everyone saw it that way. Interestingly, if we take Homer and the various cultuses that we know of that worship deities in the underworld aspects at their word, Haides wasn't the one who governed the underworld. That job fell to his wife Persephone, daughter of Demeter, whom Haides successfully conspired with his brother Zeus to kidnap and wed in the Homeric hymn to Demeter. I'm going to do a whole video on their relationship and the religious significance around it at some point, though I'm still gathering the materials for it. If you're interested in helping out with that, check the wish list in the description. Persephone was the goddess honored at Eleusis, alongside Haides, and witnessing them together at the end after going through the week-long ritual/festival was said to give one a better place in the underworld than the typical dead. I'll cover that more in the future Afterlife video and the one that I'm planning on the mysteries. Haides also had very few pictorial representations on amphorae and only has 2 surviving statues, adding a new layer of credence to the idea that invisibility was a major trait. There's evidence in the hymn to Demeter, given in the form of many epithets during the Archaic period, that it was considered unlucky to even say his name at all. We also get more of a personification of him here, where he's described as all-receiving, ruler of many, implacable, relentless, and most hated among the gods, though the latter may be contested as it was also given to Ares when describing his behavior in battle. He's not said to punish the wicked in the afterlife outside of a rare reference in later antiquity. Instead, in Aeschylus, he's said to be the most hospitable Zeus of the underworld, common to many and where all must sleep. Dike, or the goddess of justice, is also said to dwell in the underworld and judge the dead in the classical period and later, alongside with Persephone taking that role in various cult practices and beliefs, but Haides himself is decidedly neutral. In the classical period, he picks up the epithet Pluton, though scholars are divided on whether or not this epithet was once the name of a separate god, or was the name the ancients would refer to him by to avoid saying his true name. It derives from the word plutos, or wealth, and refers to his beneficent aspects. It was occasionally invoked for aid during a dire need, or to hasten the moment of a death for someone suffering. His worship in the underworld aspect was limited at best. According to Pausanias, there was only one known temple to him at Elis, and it would only be open once a year, and even then, only a priest could go inside. No one knows what image was inside that temple, as it has been lost to us. Roberts notes that Pausanias links the sanctuary to the war between the local Pylians and Heracles' forces, in which Haides was said to fight with the Elians due to his hatred of Heracles from a prior wounding. The only other major cult may have been 55 kilometers to the south, at Tripilia, where Strabo mentions that a Temenos, or set-off bit of sacred land, was dedicated to Haides. Roberts notes that these rites were said to be connected with Persephone and Demeter, and stemmed from the belief that the land in the area was particularly unforgiving and would produce either bounty or absolutely nothing. There was a reference to a potential shrine for him under the name Pluton at Corinth, though it should be noted that the word referred to caves that were said to be inlets to the underworld. There was also a cave said to be sacred to him at Eleusis. Most of his cult sites were altars to multiple underworld deities, such as the sanctuary of the Semnai Theai at Athens, which was said to contain several images of underworld deities. The temple of Artemis Sotera, or Artemis Savior in Troezen, where his image appears beside Demeter, Kore, and the Morai, the temple of Apollon at Myklai in Lacedaemonia, and the temple of Athena at Phokis were also said to have rites involving him, though we've lost most of the records as to what they were. He was invoked frequently alongside Hermes Sucopampos, Demeter Cthonian, and Persephone and Gaia Cthonian on curse tablets or katadesmoi. There's an entire book on katadesmoi that I'm working on getting, but the brief on these tablets were that the dead were invoked, most likely as messengers according to Pulleyn in prayer and Greek religion, to ask the gods directly to intervene in mortal matters. Many katadesmoi were preemptive rather than retributive, and often were curses to stop someone from testifying at a trial or other such event. These tablets were made of lead and were often shattered or had nails driven through them before being left at a gravesite or tomb. He was said to be the one who laid down the rules concerning burials and funerals by Diodorus Siculus in the Library of History, and according to Aeschylus, mourning and wailing during the grieving process was considered to be an offering to him. The Orphics were said to have special rites related to him, as they believed the underworld had many gates with secret keys that those who lived a proper, virtuous life could learn to unlock for a better afterlife. Haides and Persephone also received prayers during tomb visits when a small hole would be dug in the ground and libations of wine, honey, offerings of barley, and sometimes the blood of sacrifice would be poured into the hole. The prayers largely were to release the dead relative being contacted and offered to. If there wasn't a tomb available, such as if a relative were slain on the battlefield and ritually buried in large pits, or if the body didn't survive well enough to be buried or burned, then one could turn to one of the 4 main nekiomanteon, or oracles of the dead at Avernos, Acheron, Tainaron, and Heraclea Pontica. The one I was able to find the most about was the oracle at Acheron, which was discovered below an old chapel in Greece. This labyrinthine building contained the remains of burned beans, barley, broken libation vessels for wine and honey, and many other offerings at various points throughout the journey. These offerings are presumed to be for Haides, Persephone, and other underworld figures to placate them, that one could descend to see their friend or relative and return unscathed. They were also said to be the first deities encountered at Acheron when entering the temple. Purification rites were performed at the end involving kernips and other substances to wash away the polluting force of the spirit. It was said that if one lingered too long in the oracle, Persephone would send up the heads of the Gorgons after the lingerer. Haides had many caves dedicated to him that could have been oracles scattered throughout Greece. Hades. These caves often had vapors coming out of them that could kill birds or eventually onlookers if they spent too much time in them, and thus were seen as entrances to the underworld. Some rites, similar to those at oracles, were performed, generally beginning with the same ask as before, that Haides and Persephone release the dead to speak with the person making the offering that they may briefly be reunited. In his agrarian aspect as Pluton, we see much more attestation for worship. Robert theorizes that this could have been because of his close association to Demeter and the symbolism of Persephone's abduction while picking flowers, which was symbolic of fertility. He took on associations with the fertilization of the ground, burial of seeds, and care for the root systems of plants and the like, or as Robert puts it, those parts of plants that transgress the border between his kingdom and Demeter's. These associations appear directly referenced in the hymn of Demeter, where we are told that men, quote, hide seeds beneath the earth, which is an allusion to the hiding of bodies beneath the earth for burial. Buried seeds sustain life, both the life of the crop and the lives of those harvesting and using it, so the underworld connotations here are pretty obvious. After the 4th century, this association between life, plenty, death, and agriculture becomes even stronger when the language around death changes. Where Homer referred to them as feeble, later accounts call them blessed. So, even though Homer may have thought that Haides was hateful to men, it appears that believers through time didn't see him in this way. He was honored as a potentially kind or at least neutral ruler who kept the polluting dead from the living, except when the living would honor them and during one particular festival in which they were said to roam the earth for a day. His wife Persephone has a much larger role in the care of the dead, at least in written sources, and even is said to be the one who judged and ruled over them in later antiquity. The idea that he was somehow evil is a much later invention of folks who misinterpreted Homer and other sources and conflated him with the devil. So I'd like to take a moment to thank my patrons so much for your support. This video will be exclusive to Patreon for a whole week before I release it to the channel publicly. As always, I'll draw a new name shortly after release so I can get started on next month's topic. This was a heck of a lot of research, and I learned a few new things myself, so thank you to TheoiPhilos for the suggestion. If you're watching this after that week and you're new here, send the subscribe button to the receiver of all and poke the bell quietly so as not to disturb the grumpy dead. Drop down into the comments and let me know if you learned something, or just tell me all about how annoying the Disney version is in light of the ancient myths. Special thanks to GaelicNox for their amazing channel art. As always, links are in the description to their website and Twitter. And a massive thanks to my patrons yet again. This bonus video is for you, and I hope you enjoyed it. You all make it possible for me to do deep dives like this, and I look forward to continuing to make this information accessible for all in the future. And remember, we're stronger together.